Hello everybody. My name is Damon Edwards. I think why I'm here, I've been pretty lucky in my career. I get to see inside a lot of really interesting companies, from large, Fortune 5, sometimes Fortune 1 size companies to high flying startups. My background, I was the managing partner of a consulting company called DTO Solutions. We specialized in kind of operations improvement as well as DevOps improvement programs, primarily focused on large enterprises and kind of translating what people see on the conference screens, stuff that works at, kind of massive scale. I'm also heavily involved in the DevOps community. John Willis, I think spoke earlier, was, him and I brought one of the first DevOps days to the US. We also do a podcast. We're kind of like Game of Thrones. We make you wait a long time for new episodes, but we will do more. It's called the DevOps Cafe. You can get it on iTunes. It's basically a long form interview show. We bring people on who think have something really interesting to say, and we really dig in. And currently, I'm one of the co-founders of Rundeck. We build operations tools, and so across those different angles, I get to see a lot and really kind of form an opinion on what's going on in the industry. So when Mark asked me to talk, what's this talk about? He want to talk about, or I want to talk about, I guess we'd say, is really, how do you help people so they help you, right? And specifically here, it's how, as security professionals, do you help operations folks so they can turn around and help you? So it's really, we're going to talk about understanding the pressures that operations is on, and figuring out how to help them so they help you. And really do something special and different with DevSecOps, right? It's not just a redusting of or dust off of old ideas, but take a fresh look at security and operatability and how they work together. And I couldn't find a good quote that talks about helping people, helping you, or anything like that. So this is what I came up with. If somebody has a good quote on that, let me know. I'll fill it in. So I want to start with a quick little history, or I guess an observation on the history of DevOps, and specifically think about how DevOps started. Right, it's going to be Dev and it's going to be Ops. They're going to live in harmony. They're going to help each other out. It was going to be great. No borders, no colors, no walls. It was going to all be fantastic. But something kind of odd happened along the way. It really became heavy about Dev. Right. The focus came about the deployment pipeline, which is really developers' view of operations. The reality is there's so much more that goes on, post-deployment, right? Responding to incidents, maintenance tasks, performance investigations, building out platforms, scaling, lots of things, right? So, really deployment's not the finish line. It's really the beginning of 24 by forever, and a lot of things that need to happen. But yeah, we got very fixated on the dev side of DevOps. And what ended up happening is it's basically we got, in a lot of organizations, agile plus some automated deployment. And that's better than kind of where people were before, but it wasn't realizing the full value. The companies that really did the balance of transforming dev and transforming ops kind of have leapfrogged over those who have fallen into just we've got better pipelines, right? So now here comes this DevSecOps idea, right? We're going to insert security into this pipeline, into its rightful place, right? And say, okay, now we're going to, include security in these pipelines as well. And, my concern is we're just going to fall right back into the same trap, right? Where now it's going to be really DevSec. We're going to keep talking about vulnerabilities and deployment pipelines and things like that. The reality is are we going to leave ops behind again and not fulfill the full benefit of this, right? And my hope is to kind of make the case that security can really align itself with operations and help sort of take a holistic view on transforming. How do we get dev, sec, and ops together so we all end up at a better, at a better place, right? I guess it'd be 1 + 1 + 1 = 5 or something like that. So I think the first important thing is to understand what is the mindset that operations is under today, and what do they really care about, right? So if you think of what's going to happen in operations day, they're in a tough place, and it's a proud bunch, but they're being squeezed between these two competing business pressures, right? On one side, you've got the pressures coming from the digital and the DevOps transformations, the go faster, go faster. On the other side, we've got the lock it down mantra, right? And it's don't be the next hack, don't be the next breach, don't be the next major outage. Lock this thing down. This is now the how and where we do our business. And those two competing pressures are all come together in operations and are bearing down on operations. And operations is already operating at 100% capacity, and this is just going to basically squeezing people beyond the breaking point. And then here we've got security, right, which is one of those major forces that's driving the lock it down mentality. And it's not just application vulnerability security, but also security in terms of how do we access these things, right? We're trying to relieve this pressure to get all these people into to help us out using these kind of DevOps and SRE techniques. But it's not just about locking down the artifacts. How do we lock down? We already want to lock down our environments, and how do we give people access to those environments? How do we let the broader organization participate in this activity, right? So security plays a huge part in both the pressure that's being landed on operations, and I think also we'll see can help out pushing for solutions here. So what keeps ops under this pressure, right? What's really going on? We want to step into their shoes, and I think a lot of this actually, you can insert the word security here, and you're going to find a lot of these same pressures: silos, queues, centralization. And I'm going to look at each one of those real quick. So silos, right? So we use this word silo a lot in the DevOps world, right? And some people equate it with a team. That's not really the case. Really, siloed is about a way of working. So if you think about you're working, it's you or it's a few people on your team. You share the same backlog. You have the same management, sort of chain above you, which means you have the same priorities. You're all closely related, working the same thing. So you share the same information or the same context, and you're often using the same tools. So that's great. You're working together in this shared context, shared mind space. But in the enterprise, especially, or really anywhere, nothing lives in isolation. You're always going to need something from somebody else, especially as you grow. And this is where the silos happen, right? So you need something, somebody else can do something for you, or has the information that needs to be done, but they're working in their own backlog, their own context, their own tools, their own priorities. And this is where the silo effects start to build, because we have all these mismatches, right? So there's context mismatches, right? People are thinking in different contexts, working on different things. There's process mismatches. The processes don't really truly align. There's tooling mismatches, and also capacity mismatches. Some people are oversubscribed. Some teams have plenty of slack time. And then probably as security professionals, you feel this a lot. Probably, things are getting thrown at you. You're being brought into things too late. It's all these breaks in context, breaks in processes, breaks in tooling, breaks in between capacity mismatch that really cause a lot of thrash and churn for operations, and security as well. So what happens is the org tends to become this siloed pool of functional specialists, right? We get these requests, they come in, somebody has to context switch off of something. They look at this atomic request, usually in the form of a ticket. They have to do something about it and then kind of move on. And these different functional areas, right? Security would be one of them. Think of the operations like network, storage, firewalls, the SRE teams, or whoever it might be, divided up into these functional areas. Because very difficult. A lot of those context breaks keep getting in the way, and everybody's scrambling to do these one-offs. So how do we cover for this, right? Well, the way that we cover for these silo disconnects and mismatches is this thing called the ticket queue, right? And we all know how well that works, right? How many times is it things sit in the queue until you get a PM to push it, or somebody you fill out a ticket, you're not really sure what you're asking for, it gets kicked back to you, and you have to wait longer, or you finally get something back and it's not quite what you wanted, so you then have to go and either work on it yourself or send it back. So all kinds of thrash and bad handoffs come with these queues. And the fact is, there's actually plenty of scientific proof, academic proof that queues are a very expensive way to manage the flow of work. This comes from Don Reinertsen, who his kind of book has the principles of product development flow. It really has kind of a cult following in the DevOps space, but really lays out why do things like queues and batch sizes, right? And those type of things. Well, why do they cause such problems, and kind of gets down to the math level, behind it, the queuing theory and whatnot. So he talks about queues and says, queues automatically by their very nature introduce longer cycle times, increased risk, more variability, right? Because people are working out of context from each other and doing these one-offs. More overhead, you have to manage the queues and manage all those requests. Lower quality, right? Because all the breaks in the context, and less motivation, right? People get tired of doing something and seeing it sit for days or weeks before somebody can do something and they can see it realized. So queues are naturally an expensive way to do things, yet it's the way that we do things, right? And it's the way things are happen in operations. And also, if from what I've seen from security teams, I'm an operations person, by trade. You see these same this same effect, right? The same silo-driven way of doing things. And from one other kind of dangerous things about queues is because people end up working out of context, they end up kind of becoming these siloed labor pools. You get a lot of snowflakes, right? And snowflakes, another kind of DevOps lingo for you basically each thing is a totally unique thing, right? It might be technically acceptable or perfect, from that person's point of view at that time, but it's totally unreproducible and often brittle, right? So making a manual change on a server, or doing something last minute to a package before you go and deploy it, all that manual intervention, all those kind of ticket driven requests generally end up generating all of these snowflakes. And these snowflakes, we see time and time again, it's just unintended variability, right? And unintended variability just injects, security risks all over the place, right? I mean, we've seen stories of, global banks that, forgot to patch one machine, or left one library in place, or, messed up one configuration setting, and, bad things happen. So all this isn't just operational gridlock, but it also, leads to higher security risks as well. And then comes the idea of centralization, right? And something that we see a lot on the operations side, and from what I see from the outside, happens a lot on the security side. But looking at where decisions made, right? Who can take action? And what often happens is an incident occurs, or something occurs, some decision has to be made over here, and we end up with a series of escalations, right? And eventually it gets to the point where you're far enough away from the keyboard, so to speak. It's the vice president level has to approve something, or a director, and they don't have this context, right? Their most common decision methods that they're employing is maybe similar history, right? Like, oh, I think this looks like something I've seen before, so I'm going to judge whether that's risky or not. And as we know what they say about complex systems, they work every time until they don't, right? So basing something on past history of a complex system is generally not. Is a kind of a foolish approach. Our general folklore, right? To know that, ooh, that's risky, that's not risky, or just what people feel about things. Like our network's got problems, so therefore we should never touch it, or things like that, or just mostly guessing, right? Just saying, well, that sounds like it's reasonable, or not. So that's what we end up with a lot of. And is John Allspaw, who is a very well-known kind of operations practitioner. And now he's on the academic side as well, looking at sort of human factors, human performance, see what causes and outages and disasters. He did this little thing at the DevOps Enterprise Summit last year, where he asked the whole audience, is this dangerous? Is this risky? Right? And people go, maybe. It's like, right. What if I told you it is just a line from a script that cleans out a directory in a content cache, right? That doesn't seem so dangerous anymore. Likewise, he said, well, is this dangerous, right? I'm just making this simple, case change in a code check-in. Seems pretty innocuous, right? But what if I told you it was a status check on a firewall configuration, right? And his point was that, all work is contextual, right? The answer to any of these questions is always, it depends. You have to have the context to make these decisions. And the people who make these decisions are the ones that are closest to the problem, closest to the action. Yet we time and time again employ this escalation chain that puts the decision somewhere over here in this kind of far corner. So, the key idea there is to, shift left that ability to take action, right? Push the ability to take action from from this person, right, all the ways close as possibly as we can to the keyboard, to the person who's experiencing the issue, who really has the context or has the idea, right? How do we push that direction to them? But everything is set up in our organization to kind of keep these walls up. So, how can security help operations, right? How can we get security help relieve this pressure on operations? And why would we want to do that? Why would security want to do that? Number one, to get your new tooling in place, right? Tell them, hey, we want to inject ourselves into these pipelines. We have ideas to bring our automation and merge it up with your automation and provide a better future. Well, they can't get to that if they're kind of stuck under their own weight. So how to help the ops dig out of this is to say, well, how can we relieve as many of these pressures? And by getting rid of these things that get in the way and replacing them wherever we can with self-service, right? We've seen this work extremely well for deployment, but really it's in a lot of places it's been limited just to that, we've got this little pinhole into this kind of large, complex web of activity called operations. So the big question is, all right, well, how do we decentralize? How do we push that control down? How do we get this automation and self-service in place, start to decouple the organization? But how do we stay under control, right? And that staying under control is the part that, partnering with the security side can really, help prove the point and, kind of drive this home. So I think, to how do we get to that safe self-service place? There's a couple things to keep in mind. One is to think about, what really goes into an automated procedure, right? There's really kind of three parts to it. There's the ability to define that automated procedure. There's the ability to execute that automated procedure. And then there's the ability to govern that automated procedure, security, oversight, compliance, whatnot. And the reality is, traditionally, how we've always viewed automation is it kind of occurs within a silo, right? That someone needs something done. All three of these things, the ability to define, the execute, and the govern, happens within that operations silo. The automation is really for them, right? To do their job faster, so they can respond to these tickets faster, right? And kind of the first step is, well, let's experiment with what we call rigid self-service, right? Meaning that let's set up the automation for people and give them the button, right? Here's a button you can push to do something. And that worked pretty well in the deployment case. I mean, it's actually a quite static automation. Let me give the button to push it. But the reality is it ends up being a very limited use case because the effort involved with having to build and create this automation is quite high. And it's siloed within operations using their own siloed tools. So kind of the next realization is, well, how do we get these high velocity handoffs? Well, the only way that's going to happen is if we let the people outside, the requesters, let them define what they want to have happen, right? You can think of this difference as AWS, right? The old kind of Savvis style of hosting, you fill out a request form and you tell what kind of server you want, and then somebody has to go and figure out what that actually means and build it for you. Way too slow. Versus AWS, it gives you not only a way to run instances, but or any cloud provider at this point, but the most groundbreaking thing was you were in control. You can define your own AMIs. You can define your own configurations. They gave you the guardrails to do it in. They gave you the primitives to build it with. But you, the requester, was actually in control, right? So being able to move that ability over to outside of operations is going to make that relieve a lot of pressure from these high velocity by creating high velocity handoffs. And then truly, when you get to self-service operations, is when you can move both the ability to define and the ability to execute to the third party, to the people outside of, the second party, the people outside of the traditional operations domain. And the companies you see that get really good at this, they get to the point where they're actually pushing a lot of that governance, right? They're saying, we're going to set the master rules. We're going to set what can happen at a global level, but we're based on the business line and different risk profile. We're going to delegate as much of that ability to do your own governance or to find your own security policies. Give certain people access to hold out. What can talk to what, push that to, out as well. Just basically offloading as much of the pressure off operations as possible, right? And really the key design pattern, that we see enabling this is this operations as a service idea. Effectively what we see time and time again is it kind of works like this. We have a central location, and we're pushing to the people who need something from operations, the ability to define those actions and execute those actions. But then on the operation side, they're keeping the ability to, to approve those, or some of them define themselves. Others, they'll just be the approver of. This is usually where security often comes in, being able to do reviews of these, like code reviews, but actually looking at them as, looking at operation procedures as code. The ability to participate and collaborate on executing actions, right? Things like health checks, scaling things, responding to business requests for, turning things up, turning things down, routine maintenance tasks. Not every service is born, fully automated. In fact, most never get there. So a lot of routine maintenance tasks still have to be managed, from outside of the service. But they're at all times maintaining the security and oversight of that. And really, so that it's that key point there, that they're able to split the definition, the execution, the governance, and move it to where it's the most effective use of labor. So, kind of how does this work, right? So I'm throwing Rundeck in here just because it's a product that we have an open source version that we make. There's also a professional version, but you can build this with many different tools. This is something we see happen a lot in the industry. So kind of step one, they're establishing a secure operations hub, right? To say, this is the point where we're providing people with control, right? Our standard vocabulary for how do we start things, stop things, do different levels of health checks, any kind of ongoing operational tasks that need to happen, and combining with different observability and monitoring views as well. So it's kind of gives them that cockpit view that they can say, I have an option of things I can run, but I also have the view into into what's out there. The people who set it up, once it's set up, the engineers get visibility into their kind of controlled or limited self-service. Operations can use it for their remediation procedures, and all along security and operations stays in control. Well, that kind of helps, but it's still a silo to set this up. So step two is we're talking about that high velocity handoff, where we see people establishing an SDLC for their operations procedures, right? So treating their operation procedures as code, running them through the same SDLC process, doing the same type of code reviews, except this time maybe it's more of an operations and security focus of these reviews, having a kind of a build process to it. This is where our friends from Sonatype and Nexus, one of the 2 points they come in here, helping to distribute and regulate the promotion of these jobs. And then, step three comes along as well. Now they've got this pipeline moving, and we've got our operations procedures are treated like code along with everything else, integrating with the rest of our operational systems, right? Which often that means ticket systems, right? Sometimes even going as far as to saying, have this service automate the ticket systems, to automate the ticket process. So we have a standard change. We don't have to always open a ticket before we run it. We can just have the system open it and close it, automatically. Or we can say check and see if a ticket exists before running a procedure, or check and see if someone's assigned to it. Again, come back to our friends at Sonatype, all the kind of software supply chain and their intelligence around the security and control of the artifacts in the operational environments. We see the integration with that as well. So effectively, with this, you get the full kind of operations as a service experience. The product teams, if you wish, can be defining the procedures as they as they go. The security and operations is in control of who does what, or who can do what, and everyone's pretty happy. And then step four, where kind of security comes back in, is the ability to say, wait, let's reap the benefits of of having this system in place. We now have all this automatic evidence collection. We have these different points of control. We know who reviewed things, who created the procedure, who can run it, where they can run it, when they can run it. We have kind of traceability through all of our policies and the approval trails of what happened. So what we're doing here is we're actually decentralizing control of operational control throughout the organization, but actually raising our security posture. Because we're in control of this process. So just to recap, kind of what I was talking about. Number one, understand the pressure on operations. Know that you're going to want to change how your tooling and your place in the organization, I think aligning yourself with their needs and relieving their pressures is going to go a long ways. And part of that is understanding the cost of these silos and queues, which goes for how you govern your work as well, right? That we have to get out of that. If you want to kind of be a full participant in the life cycle, you have to get out of this, ticket-driven, siloed way of working, because it injects too much cost and delay and chaos into the process. Shift left our control making and decision making as much as possible. Empower the people closest to the problem. And don't expect people further away to have better context than those folks. So how do we empower them with the right tools and the right controls to make those decisions? As well as lean on this operations as a service design pattern. I probably should put a link here in the deck, but if you go to rundeck.com/OAAS, OAS, or just look for operations as a service, there's links on there. There's a kind of like a book we wrote. We talk a lot about, we're really kind of trying to document this pattern that we see as we see it kind of happening across the industry, very heavily aligned with kind of DevOps thinking and what you see in the SRE movement. So rundeck.com/OAAS, I think will take you directly to it. You can read it on the web, or you can download a PDF. You don't have to register for the web thing or anything. And and then the last step is, if you align yourself and help operations get moving, you're putting yourself in a position where, you can really affect greater change from a security perspective, and, look at yourself as a kind of full participant in the life cycle and helping take a holistic view of making everybody's life better. And that is all. So thank you for your time.
Damon, I don't know how you could have come closer to the time. That was perfect.
Wow. I didn't even look at the clock.
No, nice as always, as always. I was talking to Sarah Elkins on the back channel. You might have heard Sarah yesterday from General Dynamics. And she is another one of the people that are concentrating on the ops part of DevOps. And she was very happy to see that big devs and little ops, because that's the thought process, right?
Yeah, and I understand it's more of a dev. What happened is we ended up with a dev towards ops perspective, and I think now it's time to look at the ops towards dev perspective, because I think we kind of missed a lot of things. And by focusing just on pipelines, we're getting a fraction of the benefit if we can look at what actually is ailing the organization as a whole. And security is a fresh new voice that can say, yes, we want to be part of the pipeline, but we want to help go end to end and get the value across the board.
All right, thank you. Thanks for stepping in. Great way to start winding down.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
All right, we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks.